Hey students, this is a lecture on section 10.1, which is about graphing points. So for graphing points, you're going to be using what's called the rectangular coordinate system, which I've drawn here. The rectangular coordinate system has the x-axis, which is your horizontal axis, and then the y-axis, which is your vertical axis. Okay, and to graph a point, it's going to be of the form x comma y. Okay, so a point is of the form, point is in the form x comma y. So your first coordinate is x and your second coordinate is y. Okay, so your location on the x-axis, that's going to be this first number x, and then your location on the y-axis, the vertical axis, that's going to be your second number y. Okay, and so the homework from here is pretty straightforward. They'll just ask you to graph points. Okay, and as long as you put the x-coordinate first and the y-coordinate second, you can see on the right side you have positive x's, and on the left side you have negative x's. And then for the y-axis, on the top you have positive y's, and then on the bottom you have negative y's. Okay? And so let's go ahead and graph some points. Okay, so example. Graph each point. Graph each point using the rectangular coordinate system. Okay, and the rectangular coordinate system is also known as the Cartesian coordinate system. So rectangular and Cartesian mean the same thing. And Cartesian is just a word based on the guy who came up with the rectangular coordinate system. His name was Rene Descartes. So since his last name was Descartes, they called it Cartesian. Okay, just after his name. Okay, and then they also want us to state in which quadrant or axis each point lies. Okay, state in which quadrant or axis each point lies. And so for starters, we're going to go ahead and graph a point, and then I'll talk about quadrants in just a second. All right, so for number one, let's do the point 1, 3. Point 1, 3. So here, remember, your x-coordinate comes first. So here x is 1, and then y is 3. So to graph this point, we're going to go to 1 on the x-axis, so that's the horizontal axis. We go to 1. And then on the y-axis, the vertical axis, we go up to 3. So 1 on the x-axis and 3 on the y-axis, where those two meet, that's going to be where we put our point. So this point right here is 1, 3. 1, 3. And as you can see there, that's in the top right corner. So we just graphed that point. Now the other thing they wanted us to do was to state in which quadrant or axis each point lies. So this point is not on an axis. Keep in mind that when they say axis, that would mean it would have to either be on the x-axis, this horizontal axis, or on the y-axis, which is the vertical axis. This point 1, 3 is not on either axis, so it's in a quadrant. And it turns out that the top right quadrant is called Quadrant 1. Okay, so this top right quadrant is called Quadrant 1. Quadrant 1. Okay, and what makes it Quadrant 1 is it's in the top right corner, and in Quadrant 1, your x and your y are both positive. Okay, so x and y are both positive. Okay, and while we're at it, let's look at Quadrant 2. So how do you get Quadrant 2? Well, you go this way, so that's going to be counterclockwise. So Quadrant 2 is going to be over in the top left corner. So this right here, the top left quadrant is Quadrant 2. And in Quadrant 2, your x is negative, but your y is positive. Okay, x is negative, y is positive in Quadrant 2. And then if you keep continuing counterclockwise, your next quadrant is going to be Quadrant 3 down here in the bottom left corner. So this is Quadrant 3. Quadrant 3. And for Quadrant 3, both your x and your y are negative. So x is negative and y is negative. Okay, and then your last quadrant is Quadrant 4 on the bottom right. So the bottom right is Quadrant 4. Okay, and for Quadrant 4, your x is positive, but your y is negative. And I use this little notation here. So for Quadrant 1, I wrote plus comma plus. I'm just using that to show that x is positive and y is positive. And then, for example, here in Quadrant 4, the plus comma minus means that x is positive, but y is negative. Okay, so those are the 4 quadrants. And then the axes, when they say axis, they mean either the horizontal one is the x-axis. So the horizontal one is the x-axis, and the vertical one is the y-axis. Okay, so we can see that this point that they had us graph, 1, 3, is not on either the y-axis or the x-axis. So it's actually just here in Quadrant 1. So that's what we're going to write for our answer. So 1, 3 is in Quadrant 1. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and write that. Quadrant 1. And if you're wondering why they're called quadrants, they have the word quad built into them, and quad means 4. So since there's 4 of them, that's why they're called quadrants. 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. Quad means 4. Okay? Alright, so let's graph a few more points. Most people don't find this that challenging once they get used to it. It's mostly just getting oriented that's the hard part. Okay, so for number 2, our second point that we're going to graph is going to be positive 2, negative 1. Positive 2, negative 1. So here x is positive 2 and y is going to be negative 1. So let's see where that is in our picture. So x is positive 2, so that's to the right, and then y is negative 1, so that goes down to right there. So the point they gave us is right here. That's positive 2, negative 1. And as we can see, that's in Quadrant 4. Okay, so that's in Quadrant 4. Because x is positive and y is negative. All right, cool. So we've seen Quadrant 1 and we've seen Quadrant 4. Let's do a couple more examples. Okay, number 3, we're going to do negative 4, comma, negative 3. Negative 4, comma, negative 3. So remember, your first coordinate is x, and your second coordinate is y. So here, x is going to be negative 4, and y is going to be negative 3. And it's important that you don't get x and y mixed up. So for negative 4 for x, that means we're going to be going to the left, all the way over here to negative 4. And then for y, we have negative 3. So we're going to be going down 1, 2, 3, because that's negative 3 on the y-axis. So our point is going to be right here. Okay, negative 4, comma, negative 3 is right about there. And as we can see, that one is in quadrant 3 because x and y are both negative. Okay, so quadrant 3. Okay, so we've seen quadrant 1, quadrant 2. So we haven't seen quadrant 2, excuse me. We've seen quadrant 1, quadrant 4, quadrant 3, but we haven't seen quadrant 2. So let's see an example of quadrant 2 next. So number 4, we're going to be doing negative 2, comma, positive 2. Negative 2, comma, positive 2. So here x is negative and y is positive. So x is negative 2 and y is positive 2. So we're going to be going to the left to negative 2 on the x-axis, and then we're going to be going up to positive 2 on the y-axis. So that brings us right here. Okay, so negative 2, comma, positive 2, that point's going to be right around there. And as we can see, because x is negative and y is positive, this one's in quadrant 2. Okay, so the answer for that one is quadrant 2. Okay? And I just want to do a couple more. So we've seen all 4 quadrants, but we haven't seen what happens when it lies on an axis. Okay, so for number 5, let's do negative 1, comma, 0. Negative 1, comma, 0. So here, x is negative 1 and y is 0. Well, for x to be negative 1, that puts us right here on our graph. But since y is 0, that means we're right in the middle. So we don't go up and we don't go down. Because y is 0, that means our point is right here. So negative 1, comma, 0 is going to be right there on our graph. And the thing about this is it's not in quadrant 2 and it's also not in quadrant 3. It's in between. So what it really is it's on the horizontal axis, which is called the x-axis. Okay, so because it's right on that horizontal axis, we say that this point lies on the x-axis. Okay, so this one lies on the x-axis. Okay, so just a couple more. So number 6. For number 6, we're going to have 0, comma, 4. 0, comma, 4. So here x is 0 and y is positive 4. So since x is 0 this time, that means we don't go left or right. So since x is 0, that means we're right in the middle here. But because y is positive 4, we move up all the way up to here at positive 4. So our point's going to be right there at 0, comma, 4. And as you can see, this is in between quadrant 1 and quadrant 2, but it's actually lying right on the y-axis. So that's what we're going to be writing for our answer. Because this point is directly on the y-axis, y-axis is what it lies on. It's not actually in a quadrant. Okay. And believe it or not, there's one more case. So this is the very last problem we're going to be doing here. Last example. Okay, so number 7 is the point 0, 0. So the point 0, 0 is a very important point. So x is going to be 0, y is going to be 0. So since x is 0, that means we're in the middle here. So we don't go left or right. And then since y is 0, we don't go up or down. So 0, 0 means we're right here in the very middle of our graph. So that's actually just in the very middle of this entire Cartesian coordinate system, or rectangular coordinate system. And what we do is, if we're right there in the very middle, there's a special name for it. It's actually on both the x-axis and the y-axis, so we call that the origin. And the origin just means it's the very center. Okay? So it's technically on both the x-axis and the y-axis. But if you're on both the x-axis and the y-axis, that means you're in the very middle, which is called the origin. Okay, so origin means the very middle, or 0, 0. So you could also say x-axis and y-axis. Because it's in the very middle, it's on both the x-axis and y-axis.